One of the things I'm hoping to do as we move into the OPO8 meta is just provide more learning videos. I think I do a lot of gameplay and I do a little bit of kind of guide stuff with specific cards, but I want to kind of try and break into actually helping you, the community, more directly. And it kind of starts with today. I wanted to go over a video by the real Joshua that I watched the first couple of minutes of, and I thought actually was really informative. So I thought maybe I'd leave the rest of the video to kind of work through with you live to see if this actually is the way to beat Nami. As well, I also wanted to kind of provide to you that I'm gonna start opening up my DMs to VOD reviews. So for free, give me your Nami gameplay, and the key is that I'm hoping to do these on the channel for the sake of learning. I would like for you to give me your losses. Wins tend to be a little bit easier. Sometimes they tend to be a little polarizing. Sometimes they're close, but I would like to analyze your losses to then provide a bit more further context. Of course, this is someone who doesn't have any serials, doesn't have big tournament wins, but plays a ton of Nami. So this is a free access lane for you to gain a couple more tips and maybe learn from the rest of the community. So I'm going to open that up in my DMs. But regardless, let's hop into this video about, how to stop losing to Nami. And I want to really analyze if this creator has their kind of chops put about him. We're going to put the video out at 1.5 speed. We're only going to get like the talking portion of it. I'll leave the gameplay, the rest of it for you to watch. So I, again, highly encourage you engage with these creators. But so far, Joshua seems like they're on something here, so let's hop right in the video. How to stop losing to Nami. Ultimate guide, game plan, tips, and matches.
It's your boy Real_Joshua coming to you with another guide. This time we're covering how to beat Nami. First off, I want to thank everyone who's subscribed to the channel. We would love to see that number grow, so appreciate the support. And if you haven't subbed yet and you like the content, please hit that like and subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it. This is something that I've talked about before, but I've made guides on how to beat Enel, and I've made a guide on how to beat Jewelry Bonnie. And those guides I made because I feel like those decks really do a lot better against people who don't know how to play against them. And I think there's one deck that is kind of the queen or king of this style of deck, and that is Nami. This is a leader that has been around for a while, and a lot of people who've been playing the game for a while will say, oh, Nami's easy, like I always win against Nami if you lose to her.
Yo, these are the biggest liars. Like, these people that say this stuff are the biggest liars. They're the ones that are usually just playing RP Law or some type of aggro deck, and they're just letting their deck carry them. They don't actually understand the matchup, where if they were to switch onto another deck, they wouldn't understand those basics as to how to adapt that deck into beating Nami. They just play aggro the way they do, and they beat Nami. So that's fine. Nami is generally weak to aggro, but you're not actually learning anything necessarily. I mean, I guess it's fair if you're just going to play aggro decks. That's okay. That's your archetype. You're naturally going to be better against Nami. But again, yeah. So as I mentioned, this video is in 1.5 speed. But yeah, generally speaking, Nami's a deck that punishes folks that don't know how to play against her. Even still, there are ways to adapt that are more so card based and a little bit play pattern based that you can use to your advantage to adapt against those people as a Nami player.
Like your brain dead or something, but Nami is a threat in the metagame. She's winning, so I wanted to make a guide on how you actually go about beating her.
Yeah,
let's move on. First off, why make this? Nami can be very annoying to play against. She's kind of infamous for that in the One Piece trading card game community, so people tend to avoid playing her at all. I've noticed that when I've tried to practice her in the sim or understand what she does in the sim, people will just like insta concede against you and just like not play against you. And I get it, I've done the same thing. But the thing is, if you do not practice this matchup, she's going to kick your ass in real life because she feasts on opponents who do not know what to expect or what she does. That being said, if you do know what you're doing, it makes the matchup a lot clearer, if not a lot easier.
Like one of the worst examples of this are, and actually I was talking to a Black White Luffy player a couple weeks ago, last time I head to locals, and I was telling them like, hey, they're asking me like, hey, how do I improve myself in this matchup? Like, I feel like every time I play it, I lose. I'm like, well, honestly, I told them like, you were doing a lot of things correctly. I think one of the bigger things that you messed up with that you could have taken your odds with was specifically in the end game. When me as the Nami player, I'm at like, 13, 10, 8 cards left in library deck. You should not be swinging into my life if it doesn't lead to lethal. For example, if you have 2 attackers left and I have 2 life left, right, and I have like very few cards left in deck, there is no purpose in you swinging into me as a Nami player, because I could gain those cards as a way to then use to win on my turn. Not only could those be draw triggers, but those could also be characters that I could use to filter for more cards. Like that could be an Apis that I could discard 2 cards and find a Pilaf that I know is at the bottom. That could be a Kaya to draw me 2 more cards. That could be a Gloriosa that grabs a card and pushes some Kayas back up to the top. Like all these things, like these are key things that I could be using on my turn. But then if you waited until your next turn where you maybe have like 3, 4, 5 attackers, and on a full board where I wouldn't be able to use those characters, where my draws would then be unoptimal, I would not be able to use them perfectly, right? Like draw 2 triggers, they might end up being a Spada, where the Spada, I draw 2 cards, but I do have to discard a card. Like things like this are suboptimal. And so this is one of those like key things that I see a lot of players that play against Nami do not take advantage of, or they just like swing uselessly at you. Like if there's no purpose to the swing, if you're not presenting lethal, especially at that point in the game, there's no point in swinging. The whole point of your game throughout Nami for the first like 20 to 30 cards is going to be forcing me to use out as many resources as possible, as inefficiently as possible, while taking approximately 2 to 3 life. And then once you get to those final 1 to 2, you want to build out a board and then go for lethal all at once on one turn. Playing around white snakes, my 2k counters, all that stuff. Like that is what you want to be doing, generally speaking, while popping out my blockers. That's your general game plan.
A bit of it is going to come down to what she draws and how well she plays it and what she sees in her triggers. But yeah, I want to talk about that stuff a little bit more explicitly and to have it all in one place, because I haven't really found many places online where there's just like a centralized, here's how you beat Nami.
And like on purpose, I have not done this until now. I think like the Nami and like the anti-Nami folks have finally started waking up to the fact that they actually have to get good at the One Piece TCG, and they can't just continue to like suck at the game and rely on their like their NL ability to like win games. They're finally having to like learn Nami. And I think now is finally the time where like, okay, as people kind of clue into certain things, I'm here to kind of fix errors. I think people have clued into, especially some of the blue cards that really do help against the matchup. Which is perfectly fine. And I think there are some gaps in understanding that we can teach other folks to beat the Nami decks. And then once they learn that, we as Nami players can adapt to that. So now there's ways to kind of work around some of the things that the opponents are doing in that case. But on that note, by the way, completely on a side note, I do have a treasure cup this Saturday. Comment down below what my one of should be. I got a one of. I got a slot for Hanger, Usopp, Zeph, anything. What should my one of be for the treasure cup?
Here's how you deal with her. On top of that, she is getting popular. Again, she's seeing results at bigger tournaments in OPO7. So what better time to cover this than now? And I also think that this will stay relevant into the future too, because Nami is always going to have a place in the metagame, even if that's kind of waiting in the wings. So let's talk about what we'll be covering in this video. First, we'll talk about the basics of what Nami is, what she does, what her game plan is. Then we'll break down some of what her deck looks like, and then how you actually play around her, and we'll get into some games. So first, What does Nami do? Nami's leader effect is when your deck is reduced to 0, you win the game instead of losing, according to the rules. Also, she has this ability, Dawn ×1. When this leader's attack deals damage to your opponent's life, you may trash 1 card from the top of your deck, but people don't usually tend to use that. So Nami's strengths. First off, she punishes slow decks. She requires the opponent to know how the deck works, like we talked about before. She can pull out wins if she sees the really good cards, and even against a lot of the top tier decks, save for like 1 or 2 decks, which we'll talk about soon. She rewards people who actually practice the deck and who spend a lot of time with it. It has a very unorthodox win condition, which in One Piece is rare. I feel like right now everything is about combat and how well you do not let the enemy play the game. So like Lucci is just how well can you just remove your opponent's board every turn, and that's what determines whether or not you win. And so this deck is like, are you able to draw through your entire deck, which is totally different than anything else that we see in this game. On top of that, a lot of beginners are drawn to this deck because it's cheap to build, and that also makes it relevant across different metas. Nami, she's never really fallen off the face of the earth. There have been times where she's better, times where she's worse, time where she's viable, time where she's not, but people don't really know to expect her. Like
even in the Sakazuki meta, like Nami had about like a 50-50 matchup. I think a lot of the good Nami players would tell you like it was generally a 50-50 matchup even with Sakazuki. So it was very winnable. There were definitely scenarios where you can make certain play decisions to get up there. Like OPO5 was actually, generally speaking, a good time for Nami. 06 wasn't bad. It was just like kind of like a middle game meta game, it felt. OPO7 right now definitely felt like, kind of like the big increase. OPO8, I imagine Nami will take a bit of a downturn based on the type of decks that we're kind of seeing at the top. And then OPO9 is just going to be like a, oh Lord, if Blackbeard's a good deck, then Nami is struggling. All right, so...
And she can pull out some surprising wins, and for that, she'll always kind of have a place, even if it's on the fringe of the metagame. Her weaknesses, first off, just like any other deck, she can draw really badly. A lot of the time, it's going to be determined by whether or not she's kind of high rolling. She gets hit hard by certain mechanics like bottom decking, so RP Law, and then a lot of blue decks will really hard counter.
So when you say like get hit hard, it's a little context dependent. RP Law, the key with Law is that it's not only bottom decking you per se, it's just cheating out more cards. So like this is a bit of a misunderstanding. Like Gion is good because it's a bottom deck that works in combat. It punishes your events, which is why it's particularly good in that case. Whereas something like Perona may not be as oppressive necessarily. Perona isn't bottom decking. It's kind of taking cards out of our hand, but specifically the bottom decking of events. If it's bottom decking characters, that's fine because it's not affecting what's in your hand. Your hand is what allows you to like move forward through your game plan. Whereas what's already out on the playfield doesn't necessarily like matter once it's already out. Yeah, it takes away value from our sake dances and stuff, but like bottom decking hits hard has like a giant asterisk on it. It's really context dependent on what that is, especially with something like 6-cost Brook. Like that's something that I get to choose what I bottom deck. So in a lot of ways, a lot of Lucci players, they'll kind of spend so much time like removing Kayas, removing blockers and all that stuff. And then I could just kind of put those down to the bottom. Like, especially if I know if I'm playing against Lucci, I do want to throw out a peel off or two early because I know once that 6-cost Brook comes down, I can put that peel off, I can put that Kaya, whatever, at the bottom. So these are the things that like I'm thinking of kind of when I'm thinking of bottom decking. Bottom decking generally is good, especially in blue, especially in late game scenarios when you throw out like a gravity blade or like some other bottom deck effects. Yeah, it can be good. But again, big asterisks, you don't want to just rely on that. It's very context dependent.
She's not really interactive to play against. And even for the person playing Nami, it can feel like you're kind of playing solitaire at times. When it comes to playing this in person at locals, you kind of risk becoming that person who plays Nami, and like nobody is really happy to see you at locals because you're just
like, I think this is like a learning thing with the game. I think the game lacks, like, honestly, I'm going to be like hot take. The One Piece TCG, like, honestly lacks a lot of depth. Like, it's the same win condition in a different flavor. Like, imagine like this restaurant came out with like the best, I don't know, the best pilaf out there, the best rice pilaf dish out there. And all it did was give you different varieties of that same pilaf over and over again. But then all of a sudden, randomly, that restaurant had a noodle dish. And that noodle dish, honestly, was pretty solid. It was pretty good. It wasn't like 10 out of 10. It was like an 8 out of 10. That's what Nami is. Nami is the noodle dish. Yes, people want Nami, but people aren't coming to this restaurant for noodle dishes. But it's a nice surprise because maybe your friends take you there and you're like, wow, this is a pretty affordable noodle dish and I don't want to have rice, so I'm going to do that. But then all of a sudden, everyone that goes to this restaurant obviously really likes rice because they're coming to this restaurant. They like rice. So other people coming from the outside might be like, oh, when I go to this other restaurant, they have rice, noodles, burgers, buns, everything. Like they have other forms of carbs. So like, I'm going to go do that. So I'm coming from another restaurant, Magic the Gathering, that has plenty of carbs, plenty of ways to enjoy the game. One Piece is just a bunch of pilafs. It's just different forms of it. It's just the same dish in different forms, which I think a lot of people can't separate themselves with. Right? Nami is key, and a lot of people get upset with this because there isn't a variety. You are in something that lacks variety. I hope you all understand that. It is the same flavor over and over again. That in itself is a level of variety, but it lacks diversity in its offerings. Just saying. All right.
Is the person who plays Nami, you know? It can be hard to get matches in the sim. The deck is hard to learn. A lot of people like just do really badly with this deck, and it's because the win condition and the play lines are not very simple to untangle. It's easy to beat yourself. You can make one small mistake and it'll lead to you losing the entire game. Right now in the metagame, it hard loses to RP Law, which is a really popular deck, although perhaps a bit less popular coming soon.
It's like pretty bad.
You'll all regret not playing RP Law anymore because you're going to be seeing much more Namis. And then also it's pretty easy for decks to tech against you. Like decks will run something like Gion, or they'll run puddings. It's not really a Nami tech, but pudding.
Yeah, Gion just sees play, generally speaking. Like, what's unfortunate about it, Gion will just see general play just because it's a generically good 2K counter. What's great is that TCG isn't being played right now. So it used to be that like, oh, Sakazuki, like Nami was getting so annoying that Sakazuki plays TCG. So you would like run that and you could search up this 2K counter that also was like great Nami tech. So yeah, Gion does a lot of work. Generally speaking though, if Gion was like all over the metagame, Nami could like at some point tech more removal. Pudding tends to be the harder counter because especially against decks that will starve you out, what you're generally looking to do is not use up any of the Nami opponents counters or anything like that, anything that allows them to draw them cards. You want them to be as proactive as possible, play out their cards. They have 8, 9 cards in hand, then drop a pudding. Then at that point, with 5 cards left in hand, you then start attacking at that point. So that's where pudding really shines, like undoing the value of like 2 draw triggers. Like that's like game ending right there. So
does really
that's
well
where a card like that can be
a lot
really
of decks
powerful.
will kind of run cards that help to counter what you're trying to do as Nami. So let's talk about the game plan that Nami has, which will help you to play against her. First off, Nami's trying to cycle through her deck using a combination of events, characters, and triggers that will either draw and or trash cards. So once her deck gets to 0, she wins. So every turn, she is trying to use Dawn to draw cards and trash cards. She can do this in proactive ways using cards from her deck, or she can do that in response to what you're trying to do to her. So a lot of this game plan is reactive, and she's going to try to survive.
I will say now, especially with the Kuja Parts build, it is more of the proactive side of things. Like in a world of OPO5 and a little bit of 6 as well, where the plan was still like buggies. In 06, like people were moving off of buggies. Latter half of 05, people were moving off of buggies. But the whole like Deathwing build with buggy drawing Impel down and Deathwing and Brickfist, like that was a more reactive deck. Like, yeah, Brickfist was a proactive card, but in a lot of ways in the latter half of things, like Brickfist ended up being like honestly a removal spell early, a removal spell early, a pitch card to gavel mid, and then in the late game it became like a proactive card for Kaya. Like it was more reactive of a deck, especially with Deathwing being able to like forcing you to aggressively get rid of your hand. Now you're kind of recurring your Gloriosas and your Kayas to play those, to look for Margarets. You play the Margarets as blockers, you defend those. Like it's a more proactive plan. You want to move through your deck a lot more consistently
by using
instead of in
counter
big
from
bursts.
her hand, balancing proactive cycling with enough Dawn to react to opponent swings. So she has a lot of events that she will play, which will allow her to counter out of up to 9k attacks with a single card. And those cards will also give her added benefits like trashing the top couple cards of her deck, or allowing her to bounce character back to her hand, which allows her to get more value out of her characters and to trash more cards or draw more cards from her deck. She also tries to generate game swinging value with situational combos that can really catch opponents off guard. And this is where it really helps to know just the basics of what you're going to be encountering when you play against Nami, because if you do not play correctly, and it can be kind of like a nuanced and small thing that's not really an intuitive way to play, you can give Nami a lot more value than she would be able to have from just making one slightly altered play.
Right, like in many ways, like a very common way that a lot of players give value to Nami players is the fact that they will like play out, like let's say on their 8 Dawn turn, they play out a Moria and they bring out a bunch of things, and then they have like 2, 3, 5k attacks, right? Like in that case, what you're doing then is you're then giving me value on my like White Snake, right? Like you're using up Dawn for no reason. Or maybe a better example of this is maybe on their 9 Dawn turn, they play Moria, right? And yeah, you're building out your board, I get it. Or actually, no, your 10 Dawn turn is a better example of this. I'm thinking like Black White Luffy. So you play out your Moria, great. Then you have 2 5k swings, right? Somehow more Black White Luffy tends to have more 6k swings, to be honest. But let's say you're leader. It's better to spread out your Dawn to 6k swings than to play 2 Dawn on your Luffy, activate your leader ability unless you definitely need to, right? Like it's better to swing out, have 6k swings to play around the White Snake, because at most what you want to be doing, or bare minimum I should say, is forcing your Nami opponent to use 2 cards on every swing as much as possible. So that starts with swinging 7k. A lot of times that could just be in the early game. If you see like 2 Dawn up, swinging 6k, because that forces out like 1 card out of their hand. And it's just making sure like the White Snake now doesn't get value, especially against the aggro decks. A lot of times you're okay with something like a Rubber Band or a Spada and stuff like that like happening. But a lot of times you just want to swing 9s, you want to swing 6s if you're aggro early, and then in the late game, where possible with like bigger characters like Moria, you want to swing like 11s, possibly 13s. 13 is kind of like the big confirm, because that's going to take somewhere in the range of, 3 to 4 Dawn just to counter out of. Like that could be gavel, like a 13 Dawn swing, or 13 Dawn swing is 2 Dawn on a 4k and then 1 Dawn on a gavel, or 2 Dawn on a 4k, 2 Dawn on a 4k. So anywhere between 3 and 4 Dawn. And then if obviously I, as the Nami player, that's just a swing out of the 13, then you need to use an additional card to then counter out of that. So that's like 3 cards. And then Lord knows if I have to, as a Nami player, use a 2 Dawn 4k and then multiple like 3 2k swings, just a 2k card, to counter out of your 13k swing. Like it's just not a good value proposition just to match the 13, because then you still need that 3rd card to get over top of it. And so these are the type of scenarios that you want me to do. You want me to use multiple cards in a 1 swing, not 1 card for 1 swing. You don't want to go one for one. You want to use multiple pieces of my
So here's a
value.
fairly standard deck list that we've been seeing in OPO7 at least. These deck lists have changed over time, but with OPO7, she got what's called the Kuja Pirates package, which has allowed her to get even more card draw, and it's been really good for her, let's put it that way. So all these cards help to draw from your deck or bounce cards back to your hand.
And like, I hope like a lot of people understand why. Like, honestly, and I've been saying this for a bit now, the best card in this build right now is actually just Snake Dance, because Snake Dance is that reactive Brick Fist that like Airbrick Brick Fist like actually did a lot for the Nami deck, but it was bad because like, yeah, it was some removal, but you had to do it on your turn. That like you lost a lot of information and value just by holding up that Dawn. Whereas Snake Dance then allows you to counter out of an attack and recur a character to then use back on your turn to get another Snake Dance, to do it again, to get a Love Beam, to draw another card. Like it allowed you to kind of move through your deck very consistently. Snake Dance is low-key one of the best cards in this deck right now, if not the best card in recent kind of memory. Obviously, the best cards are, like Kaya and Pilaf, like sure. But Snake Dance, just out of the Kuja Pirates package, Snake Dance is the top end.
Really solid. This is a recent list from Sebastian Chavez, which placed in the top 16 at the Latin American TCG Online Regional, which was only a couple of weeks ago.
We're past Perfume Fever at this point,
of 2024. So Nami has access to a good amount of more proactive plays, these being plays that she can make when she is on her turn, and she doesn't require you to do something first for her to react to, and she will play these on her turn because they allow her to cycle through her deck. First is Kaya, one of the best cards in this deck, honestly. It's a draw 2 cards, trash 2 cards from your hand. It cycles. It's really freaking good. We should note that with a card like Kaya, this is a hand negative action, because let's say you have 5 cards in your hand. Play 1 Kaya, draw 2, and then you trash 2. Now you have 4 cards in your hand. So you are not drawing any card to your hand from Kaya. You're actually losing.
So this is, for those of you Magic players, this is very much like Faithless Looting. Kaya is functionally Faithless Looting. You just don't get the flashback effect. But so it's card selection. So for many of you that have played other TCGs, you will recognize Kaya not as card advantage, not as necessarily card draw, because you're still going down on cards. Card draw would imply that you are going positive or even on cards. Kaya is card selection. You are filtering cards out. Although Kaya is kind of drawing you cards and moving you towards your game plan, a lot of times you aren't just playing Kaya for that effect. You are sometimes kind of trying to filter out dead cards and get rid of them and kind of move through the deck, because a lot of times if you don't have to, you don't generally want to use your Dawn against more aggressive decks. And so I'm happy to kind of move through this section a little bit, just kind of explain some of this. But Margaret, just being that blocker on play, no counter. So this is going to be a little bit of a tricky card to keep in your hand. This is like your biggest gavel fodder outside of maybe your Impel Down All-Stars. Impel Down, at least you can kind of play for 1 Dawn when you draw it. Gloriosa, a great Snake Dance target, as mentioned here with the good bounce. Gets Margaret, is fantastic there. Margaret is also really good against Lucci, because a lot of times like Lucci does need to use a card or 2 or an effect or 2 to reduce Margaret. At that point, once they've used that effect to pinpoint on Margaret, just use the Margaret and block out, and then they lose the value of the effect they use to minimize this. So a lot of times, again, it's an effect plus a card, or like a card plus a card to get rid of Margaret. So that's kind of like that 2 for 1. Even more value, because you do just kind of play it and draw a card as well. Apis honestly is low-key one of the better cards against counter tech, specifically against if you're worried about putting. Apis is one of your better cards. If you are worried about putting, especially against a blue deck, it can be valuable to just use Apis to get rid of some events, but not just kind of lose out to putting, because Apis can search for itself. So it has a lot of like innate targets. Like your Apis targets in an average Nami deck right now are 4 Kayas, 4 Apis, 4 Sanji's Pilaf, maybe like 1 Hanger, right? So that's 13 cards. And then you have Rubber Band, Usopp's Rubber Band, and then Gum Gum Gavel. So that's like 5 times 4, that's 20 plus 1. Like on average, you have 20 to 21 targets off of Apis. Like that's like half, if not more, of your deck. Like chances are you will not whiff. You can whiff with Gloriosa, although again, it's so rare. Like chances are in a perfect world in the beginning, you have like 16 targets, whatever. Apis like almost never whiffs. So it's a great way to get 2 cards out of your hand, play around putting, and kind of get that going there. Sanji's Pilaf, I mean, pretty self-explanatory. 3 Dawn, draw 2 cards. Trigger is fantastic. I mean, yeah, this just, it does a lot.
which is to
Go to
draw
the
2
events
cards.
here.
So if they see this in their life, they just draw 2 cards. This is the ideal thing that they would have in their life cards. But if they have to play it from their hand, it's not too bad either. It's just that they won't have as much Dawn up to counter out of your attacks later. Okay, so here are the reaction cards that they have. These are going to be kind of the counter cards that they use when you actually attack into them. So
Deathwing's a little rare.
You need to look at their Dawn, and this is what to expect them to use against you when you do that. Okay, Love Beam, very, very strong. Most of the 2-cost reaction cards that they use are going to be plus 4k counter.
Yes.
So
yes.
if you attack for 5k and they use this, it's going to counter it because it'll bring them to 9k. If you attack them for 9k, they'll have to use one of these 2-cost ones plus like a 1k or a 2k counter plus, or maybe like another event or something like that. So Love Beam gives them plus 4k power, and then they draw a card. If they have 2 Dawn up and 3 or less cards in hand, you can almost always expect they're going to be playing a Love Beam. But then they have the Gum Giant Gavel, which is one of the stronger cards in this deck. By paying 1 Dawn and trashing a card from the hand, they're getting plus 4k counter and drawing 2 cards essentially, because trashing it's not quite the same as drawing, but for this deck, it's allowing them to get 2 cards closer to their win condition. Desert Spada, it's a 2k counter power. Then you get.
And like Spada is low-key one of the better cards in the deck too. Like I personally don't like it, but I've kind of tried to cater my game towards its power as well. Like you will gain a lot more points as a Nami player for just bottom decking cards with your Spada and just understanding what's better to draw in that case. And it's not just about putting cards on top and figuring out like, okay, I'm playing a rubber band next. What card am I milling? Oh, I'm playing a Spada next. I'm milling the top 2 cards. What is the 3rd card I'm drawing? Like that's like very like level 2 Nami. Like if you want to advance to level 3, generally speaking, like you want to bottom deck a lot more with Spada a lot of times. Deathwing isn't played that much anymore. If you do come across a Nami player that's playing like multiple Deathwings, that is a rare thing. It's not the correct thing to do. If you're playing Deathwing, you should be playing probably a buggy or 2. Honestly, you should just be playing Mr. 1. Let's be honest. Like if you're playing Deathwing, you should be playing like the Impel Down package, and you should probably be playing Mr. 1 because Mr. 1 needs to recur Gavel. You need to actively be reducing cards in your hand. If you're playing 4 Deathwing, you need to play the Deathwing. Like you have to change your game plan and play to the Deathwing. Like the Kuja Pirates package and playing to Deathwing is very different. I don't think it's smart to actually mix the two. You can just be doing better things. I'm going to be so honest with you. I understand a lot of you just like can't like get rid of it, but like play Kuja or play 4 Deathwing. Don't be playing like the one of Deathwing that a lot of Nami players have right now. Like if you still have it, is for bluffing, but a lot of metas and a lot of players have adapted, realizing that you only have 1. Don't play 1 Deathwing. Don't play 2 Deathwings. Like play 4 or play 0. And then at that point, if you're playing 4 Deathwing, it comes with Mr. 1 because Mr. 1 needs to return Gavel to empty cards out of your hand. Just the truth of the matter. But well, I like what he's saying here. Just like understanding your Dawn requirements. If you're swinging against Nami, what can they do with 3 Dawn? What can they do with 2 Dawn? What can they do with 1 Dawn? If they have 1 Dawn, generally speaking, just swing. Like if you wanted to just force 2 cards out, swing 8k. If they have 1 Dawn, if you wanted to just get an attack in and they have 1 Dawn, swing 9, because then they would have to get Gavel plus a card. And then plus another card, or if they have like maybe 2 cards in hand, you know for sure at 1 Dawn they cannot counter out of that. With just 2 cards in hand and 1 Dawn up, they cannot counter out of a 9k swing. Because they're just going to take the hit. The max they can do is a Gavel. There's no 5k counter at 1 Dawn. There's no 2-card combination at 1 Dawn that's going to get you up to 9k or up to 10k, I should say, past that to counter out of a 9k swing. So these are the type of things that you want to think about. Like if they have 2 Dawn and like 1 card, if they have 2 Dawn, 1 card, swing 9k. Because then that forces them to either like snake dance, like, and so this is the type of thing you want to think about. If you want to get rid of cards, if you want to get rid of resources, if you're at that point in the game, swing 9k. That forces them to have Love Beam at 2 Dawn plus a character to counter out. At 1 card, that's a fantastic trade. Or they go Snake Dance, counter out 4k, bounce a character, trash that character. That's great. That's the type of resource exchange you want if you're trying to get rid of cards. If you're trying to get a hit in, you want to swing depending on what's on the board. Like, you go Love Beam. And then if they have no other Dawn, you want to swing 11k because then the chances, well, you probably just play your odds, go like min-max. If you really desperately need to get a hit, you'd swing 11k because then that plays around the fact that they Love Beam and draw into a 2k counter. Chances are you can get away with just a 9k swing or a 10k swing because then they could draw into like a 1k counter and still like counter out of that. Like, that's like a Gloriosa. But chances are, like, if you think they have a Snake Dance, like you kind of looked at their yard, they only have 1 Snake Dance in there, and you're like, okay, maybe they have 2 Dawn, 1 card left, it's probably Snake Dance. Depending on what on your board, you're going to swing to that. So if they have a Kaya on board, you're going to swing 11k because then they can go Snake Dance, bounce the Kaya, counter out. If they have a Gloriosa on board, you can swing 10k because then they go Snake Dance, bounce that, that's only 10. right? So you're kind of matching what's on there. Like you have to play around, you have to play against these cards to understand, like play Nami as a deck, and then you can understand what cards to play around in what situation. That's kind of like the level up moment that you want to have. So move to this next section here.
Then we have White Snake. Up to one of your leader or characters gain 1k power for this turn, then draw one card. Okay, note that this is for this turn, so it will turn.
This happens on the sim a lot. I think like in paper, there's like ways to correct this and everything. You probably should be kind of placing White Snake on your leader to like represent this and everything. But White Snake's for the turn, happens on the sim. A lot of people forget it. Yeah, it's just like a permanent buff. It's great against those tap out turns. So especially against yellow, where they have a bunch of like low swings. Yellow tends to have like 6k swings like Gadatsu and that 4-cost 6k that like on death, like they do something with their life. Like it's like stuff like that. Like they have a lot of 6k, but a lot of times what can happen is like they'll play like 10 mom, and like you can just play White Snake to get around like 2 attacks, and then like 1 9k swing to get around like a raw like Yamato or something like that. Like White Snake is actually like really solid in situations like that. But yeah, Snake Dance, you have to like really play around this trigger too as a Nami player, as an opponent to Nami. Like if you feel like Snake Dance is like one of their triggers, especially if you see it as a like as a Katakuri player, what you can do is maybe even like play around it. You could, if you have 2 attackers and you know the card on top is Snake Dance, maybe from like a previous time that you handled it or manipulated it, you want to swing with your character first. So if you have a leader and a character, you want to swing with your character first. That way, when the Snake Dance is triggered, yeah, they can bounce your character, and they can bounce their own stuff, but then you get that hit in. If you were to swing with lead to trigger that, then Snake Dance comes up, bounces your character, and then prevents that attack from even happening at all. So you want to make sure that you're playing around a trigger like this. Attack with your characters first, swing lead last. Generally speaking, your leader is like the most... It's like the hardest thing for Nami players to really interact with. Zeph isn't really a played card anymore. Just removals everywhere. It's gotten so efficient. It's just not slow enough. And even if it's slow, there tends to be a lot of blockers in the metagame. Like if it's slow, black can do well. Black removes Zephs really well. Like Zeph just isn't like relevant right now. Yeah, I wouldn't even think about Zeph. I wouldn't even think about Zeph. Like y'all know Zeph. Like you can block Zeph, counter out a Zeph. Like don't let Zeph hit you. If Zeph hits you as an opponent, the Nami player has officially caught up, or they're now like way too far ahead. That's it. Like they never hit you with Zeph and you're losing. That's like a 1% chance. If they hit you with Zeph, they've officially caught up and you should be scared, or they're winning officially. Because just milling 7 cards is absolutely like astronomical. It's an astronomical amount of cards. So yeah, that's generally what I would kind of say for cards like this. Let's go into the tips.
Okay, so here's some tips for how we will play against Nami. We'll get into the meat and potatoes of it here. First off, you want to go wide. The first thing you want to do is you go wide, okay? Any deck, I don't care what deck you are, go wide against Nami. The thing is, a lot of decks cannot go wide, or if they can, it will take them a very long time to do so, which is a problem. So a lot of the times your success in whether you beat Nami or lose to Nami is how well your deck can go wide against them. And even if your deck can go wide, you're not like 100% going to win, because you're playing against them. You'll see this deck can draw like crazy. It's actually horrifying the speed with which they draw through their deck. Okay, so just do your best to develop.
Even if you're going and if you're going wide, you really need to play around White Snake. If you're going wide and not playing around White Snake, that's your fault.
A wide board, and
don't swing 5k attacks. Like, so the next section where you're swinging is saying swing 5, 7, 9. Unless they're like tapped out, it's not even worth it. Like, okay, if they have 1 Dawn, spam 5. If they have 2 Dawn up, like, don't bother with 5. Swing 6, 6, 7, 9. 6, 7, 9, and in the late game you're swinging 11, 13. Like 6, 7, 9. It's not 5, 7, 9. So a little bit of a caveat.
He's not going to have like a bunch of attackers.
You need to play around White Snake.
She will use the leader, and she will attach Dawn to the leader to swing at your characters. So make sure you have a little bit extra counter in hand, so you can counter out of her leader attacks, because you're
generally
only going to be seeing 1 or maybe 2 of those a turn, and a lot of time you're going to have a lot of 2k counters in hand that aren't really going to be doing anything else for you. So it's good to just use those to counter and protect your board. Next, once you have a wide board, or if you are not able to establish one, you want to be spamming 5k, 7k, and 9k attacks. So this will change if she becomes like a 6k leader, but you want to swing for her base attack and then 2k more than that. Okay, it's going to change depending on how much Dawn you have up, how much Dawn she has up.
Yeah, again, generally speaking,
5, 7, 9 are going to get you the most.
It should be 6, 7, 9,
5Ks
not
are going to be ideal when she's used counter.
Let's just put it, you will win a lot more games as an aggro opponent if you swing 6 against Nami, not 5. I'm not faulting the creator on this one. I'm just kind of like updating the tips. Generally speaking, you should do your best to play around Snake Dance, because what they've been saying generally so far has been correct, in the sense that you want to demand multiple resources out of someone, and just swinging 5k is just not following that tip at all. You want to play around the Snake Dance or White Snake.
From hand that is not events. So if you've made a couple attacks against her and you've seen her discard like a Gloriosa and an Apis, then that's good. That's a good sign for you that she's countered out using a lot of characters already. So she may not be able to use, she may have to respond to every attack from then on out with events, which is really good because those events are countering for 2k and 4k, which is already going to be a bargain for you if you're attacking for 5k and she has to spend a 2-Dawn 4k counter event just to get out of that, right? So yeah, remember 5k swings are always going to demand a card, and many Namis don't run many 1ks. So if she's using a 2k to deal with your 5k attack, that's already an inefficient way of countering out of your attack. And versus that deck that came in top 16 that I showed you earlier, swinging for 5k would be really good because that deck only is running 2 1ks. So you're always going to be getting at the very least a 2k out of her. Now, just remember also, like, there's different reasons why you would use different kinds of attacks. 9ks will demand multiple resources. Okay. If they have 2-Dawn up, it will require the use of a plus 4k event. And then on top of that, another character to be pitched. So they have to get rid of 2 cards. 7k is just like way to demand
all around the most efficient
plus a 1k characters, that is, or a 2-Dawn 4k counter event. So if you just want to make sure that you're getting one of those big events out of her, 7k is a good way, an efficient way to do that. So I think the rule of thumb, if I was to put this in kind of a general way, would be swing with one of 2 intentions: A, to get resources out of the Nami's hand for the best Dawn value possible, or B, to take their life cards. So if I think the Nami has 0 character cards in hand with counter on them, okay, then spamming 5ks would be really good in that situation because they're going to have to use their Dawn for every 5k attack, with me not having to dedicate.
Swing 6. Correct asterisk, swing 6. Don't swing 5s. Play around the White Snake. I'm saying this as a Nami player, play around the White Snake. But what they're saying is like generally correct. It's what I was saying before with swing with one of 2 intentions, taking out resources, or if you need to take a hit, you swing slightly more. Like generally correct here. Again, the only caveat here is you should swing 6 more if you're able to. And if you're going aggro, if you're going wide, you should prioritize swinging bare minimum 6. If you build out a board quick, maybe something like Dofi, where you can go like, you know, spam out like a Jinbei for 3, play out like an Edward Weevil, draw into like multiple, like if you're able to spam out a board quick, once you get out there, swing 6s, then you're probably able to then start swinging like 7s, 9s, like all that stuff. But early swing 6s where you're able to.
Any Dawn to those attacks whatsoever. And then at the end of my chain of attacks, I can just ensure that once they're out of Dawn, they're just going to clear. I think when you just like see what they have in hand and the Dawn that they have up, you can kind of figure out pretty easily what they're going to be able to do on a given turn. Okay, so let's go to tip number 2. Play around her value plays. We talked about those big value swinging cards before, Kaya being the big boogeyman, and Snake Dance, the 2 cost 4k counter event that allows Nami to bounce a card back to hand. So if you have removal in your deck, you want to make sure that you use that on the Kaya before you start swinging at all. Correct. Or else she'll be able to just bounce the Kaya back to their hand, and it's just, for them, it's just an insane amount of value. Just don't let them do it. Spend it on. Trust me. Like if you're playing an L and you have a Gadatsu, use that on the Kaya before you do anything else.
Yes.
Second, never overcommit Dawn to an initial attack. Remember the White Snake, which makes Nami a 6k leader for the rest of your turn. If in the scenario that we discussed earlier where you swing 9k and then a bunch more 5ks, that would mean that if you first swung 9k, she counters out of that and then makes all your 5ks irrelevant. How would we do that instead? Well, maybe let's say you have 3 attackers and you have 5 Dawn. You can just make sure that you're able to bring the others to at least 6k swings for the rest of your turn. So if you have 5 Dawn,
again, play around that White Snake. I've seen so many people play against myself that generally could have won if they played around White Snake better. Or actually like thought about playing around White Snake.
You would go 2k on your leader, swing for 7k, and then have enough to have 6k, 6k, 6k. But you can kind of, you know, split those as you see fit. Next, keep emergency removal for value generators like Zeph, Crocodile, Inazuma, etc. We didn't.
Yo, shout out to Inazuma. Yo, oh, come on. Y'all know the videos I was putting up. Saucing with Inazuma. Come on, it was a spicy build. Inazuma, like you'd play the Deathwing build, you'd empty out your hand, you'd have Inazuma like giving you a free draw to. Yo, shout out to Inazuma. Come on, that's a niche Nami tip right there. Ain't no Nami players playing Inazuma but me. Crocodile a little bit rarer too. Removal's gotten really efficient. You generally don't want to be playing Crocodile right now. Probably won't be a meta for Crocodile in a minute. Zeph is just like a little too slow. But yeah, I understand. Like Zeph is out of the 3 here. Zeph is probably the one you want to play around the most, but yeah.
about Crocodile or Inazuma,
Shout out to
they are
Inazuma.
much less popular in the meta right now. I think it's just important to know that there's going to be some cards that will come out that will be a big threat if you leave them up, and you need to have, or it is helpful to have ways to deal with those cards. So just make sure that you save some removal in your hand. You're not just like discarding it willy-nilly, because you want to be able to deal with at least one big threat before the end of the game. You're not going to see it every game against Nami, I will say, but when it does, you will appreciate having held on to a Gum Gum Red Rock. Finally, we have Mind Their Initiative. So in the early game, do not swing if you cannot get resources out of their hand. So we already know how the deck works, right? Like if the Nami has one Dawn up, they're probably gonna be able to counter for 2k or 4k. Then you're gonna swing at them, they're gonna use a giant gavel, and then they'll go up 4k. So a lot of times, like if you're swinging that early, you don't want to do that because they're just...
So I will say though, if you are able to swing 7k in this specific instance, it's worth it. It's worth it. Because if they gavel, that's perfectly fine. That's a card that you forced out of, that's 2 cards you forced out of their hand. Yeah, they mill 2 cards, but that's a 9k counter that they don't have later. In this specific scenario, especially in the early game, as they're mentioning with their caveat, it's actually worth just swinging 7k. Don't swing 6k in this case. So this is true with swinging 5 or 6. Don't swing that. But if they have 1 Dawn, chances are you will be able to get 2 cards out of their hand if you swing 7. So asterisk on this, I don't agree. I think you should be swinging at least 7. Because again, it's about taking those resources out long term. It's going to be better because eventually it's going to lead to, if you take those 2 cards out, chances are a hit will hit your opponent, take a life away much earlier than before, if you weren't able to swing then. So if you, in this specific scenario, if you're able to swing 7, I would do it.
We're just going to give them more value while not making any sort of impact on the game whatsoever. Just remember that when you're putting pressure on them, you have to try to do it all at the same time. That way you can wear down their pool of available Dawn, and then you can start getting hits in on her life.
Correct.
So sometimes this is going to entail waiting until you have 7 Dawn or something. Like don't swing until you're at the 7 Dawn turn. You have a couple bodies on board, and then you can swing like 3 times or something like that and devote all your Dawn to that. At the same time, don't wait too long to swing. If the Nami can make too many initiative plays like Sanji's Pilaf, Kaya, Glorioso, Marguerite, etc., they'll be able to leave up all their Dawn in the late game and counter all your tall swings while drawing.
I've seen this happen with multiple yellow players, multiple black players as well, like Lucci players, where they'll just like work on removal and not do anything. And I'll just have a bunch of these free turns where originally like it wasn't good for me to play Pilaf. And I was like, oh, I only have like 2 Dawn left, 1 Dawn left, whatever. And they just won't punish me for it. And I'll just be able to untap and like, oh, okay, guess I'll just play my second Pilaf, and like now I have 4 Dawn up. Now I have 5 Dawn up versus like the last turn where I had only 3 or 1. Like you have to like read every turn. You have to read the situation every turn
for a game
against Nami.
So you have to walk this kind of fine line where you're trying to build a board of attackers without waiting too long to use them, but also not going in too early, because if you do, she's just going to draw too much. Here's also a little cheat sheet. The more I look at this, the more I feel like it's not like quite that useful. But what you should know is like if she has 5+ Dawn, you just want to kind of be mixing it up and trying to get information about what they have in hand. If you have like a ton of Dawn or a 9k on board, that's really good for you. Just swing for 9k, and they're going to have to...
The 3 Dawn one, like I'm kind of reading through this. Like I think a bit of this is correct. I think like a lot of this is generally like good tips. The 3 Dawn one, again, I just don't think a lot of Nami players are playing Deathwing. If they're playing like you should not be playing around Deathwing. If they get you with Deathwing, you got by Deathwing. It's just like, unless you're in an extreme late game scenario, like I just don't see the value in playing around Deathwing unless you're specifically there in that case. Like in the mid-early game, don't play around Deathwing as a Nami opponent right now in this current metagame. If Nami changes, sure, just not a card. Unless you know specifically you're a Nami opponent, you have played against them before, maybe played some practice rounds before the LGS locals start or the thing starts, like you know they're playing Deathwing, don't play around Deathwing. It's just not worth it. But the rest of this generally is...
One of their 4k Dawn cards and something else to get out of that, so you'll get 2 cards out of their hand. If they have 4 Dawn, be careful of double White Snake combos. Be wary of 4k plus 4k. So you know what you really don't want to do? You do not want to swing for 8k, okay? 9k is a much better breakpoint for you. If they're at 1 Dawn, just remember, expect...
So yeah, there you go. They're finally kind of talking about 6k spam is good against like White Snake. So yeah, this is a key tip here. Yeah, generally speaking, 8 Dawn is like the big no-no. 5 Dawn isn't actually that big of a note. Like you would rather swing 5k before you swing 8. Don't give me the free value. It's better you swing 5 and force me to have the White Snake than go 5 and then I don't have the White Snake and I have to use a 2k counter. That's much more value. Don't swing 8. That's not value. Swing 9. Right? Swing 7 or swing 9. Don't swing 8. It's better to swing 5.
Kind of like discarding characters from their hand while using maybe like a Gavel or a Desert Spada or a Rubber Band of Doom. But it's like, you just keep just spamming 5k swings and it's crazy. When they have 0 Dawn up, this is your time to strike. So just like keep swinging. If you want to get like a for sure hit, 9k is almost always going to go through, but if you have a few swings on board, a couple 5ks will get a lot out of their hand a lot of the time, or make them take a couple life. And with that, let's get into some games.
So in this case, I will leave the games up to my opponent. I highly recommend go into the video and watch this. This is the type of video, this is the part of the video I'm going to leave alone. The video is going to be linked down below. Go click on this creator. I thought a lot of these tips were great. Just kind of rounding out the video. I think a lot of things that he said is actually generally correct. I will again provide that huge caveat of 6, 7, 9 is what you want to be swinging in the early game. Play around that white snake. But I think understanding like what certain amount of Dawn does and using up the Nami opponent's resources early and playing to take resources and not life is key. I think a lot of opponents get stuck in the mud of like playing to take life. Like in the early game, generally speaking, you're playing to take resources first, and then life is a bonus. And then late game, you're playing to take life. Because once they run out of resources, it becomes a lot harder for the Nami opponent to like, you know, use resources effectively to counter out of life, right? Like if they're bottom decking a bunch of things, like they're going to start drawing into their Spadas, drawing into their Pilafs, drawing into their Kayas, and like those aren't necessarily good counters. Those are resources that they need to win the game. And so that's what you kind of want to force. You want to make them use up their resources, gavel, you know, pitch like a snake dance. Like these are the type of scenarios that you want to force them into. Specifically like with that one, like in the early game where they have 1 Dawn, it is good to swing 7 because that forces them to use a 2k counter plus a 2k event, or they use a gavel pitch a card, and that pitch card is now a resource that they don't have access to, whether it be a Margaret, so it's not a blocker in your way, whether it be like another event that they don't have access to later. Like you're working to kind of counter out a resource. So I really like this video. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm opening myself up to like kind of VOD reviews as a free resource to you as the Nami community for learning. Let me know what you think of this video. Leave a like. Go to the video, leave a like on that video, and maybe just comment down below where you came from. I did not ask Joshua to like react to this video. I just found it, thought it was a great resource, and just wanted to promote it because, hey, you know what? Why not? Learn how to play against Nami so us Nami players can learn how to play against that, and we can all just improve together. GG's and great video.